Good morning. Here we go. Video number 5 in our little course called How to Know and Understand the Bible. Welcome back. We are going to move a little bit deeper into literary context. I know in our last video we were talking about, I think our last video was entitled Seeking Context. And in this one, I want to dive a little bit deeper into what is known as literary context. Some of this is going to be a brief review from our last video, but I do want to focus in on some features within literary context that are crucial in truly understanding the Bible, knowing and understanding the Bible, knowing how to interpret the Bible. So, with that said, why don't we just jump into this as we go into literary context. So, historical context, again, this is somewhat of a review from our last video. You've got biblical context and historical context. The biblical context on the left, you see here, is where we begin by looking at this passage. If we take one verse, right, John 3:16, and we want to locate this in biblical context, we locate it first within its pericope, right? That is a fancy word that talks about a unit of thought. That word means a unit of thought. So an example is you might be watching this video saying, I think I need to get something to eat while I'm watching this video. That's a unit of thought. And if you were to write that down, you might take 3 or 4 sentences. You might say, I was sitting on the couch, I began watching the video, and then I realized I'm going to grab some food while I'm watching this video. So I went to the kitchen and I prepared a sandwich or whatever. So that's a pericope. It's one unit of thought. So where is this verse situated within the pericope? And then we expand out to chapter, and then the section of that book, and then the book itself, and then the Testament. So where is that verse positioned biblically? That's the biblical context. We covered that in the last video. The historical context, we interrogate the text. We ask the question, who is the author? Who is the audience? What is going on? When was this written? When was it received? When was this story? When did it occur? Where? Where was the book written? Where is the audience to whom it was written? And where is this little story taking place in this particular book? How did these things happen? Why did they happen? Etc. So this is how we situate the verse within its biblical and historical context. At this point, if we were in a class and going, doing this live, I would be breaking us up into small groups and inviting you to figure out the biblical and historical context of John 3:16. We'll skip that for now. So literary context. All right, so let's switch gears here. We know about historical, we know about biblical context. What is literary context? Literary context examines, or that is to say, criticizes, and I'm using that word in a scholarly context, not a negative, hey, don't criticize me context. So literary context examines or criticizes the Bible as a piece of literature. So the information of the Bible that helps the message make sense. In other words, there are some people who will study the Bible as a piece of ancient literature, and they do so for academic purposes or literary purposes, and that has nothing to do with faith. We could get in the car and I could drive down to Arizona State University, and we could walk into their Department of Religious Studies, and I could introduce you to scholars there who know the Bible way better than you will ever know the Bible in your lifetime. And they're not Christians. So these are people who study the Bible as a piece of literature. You could do the same thing. You could study you can study the Quran. You could study the writings of Gandhi. You could study the writings of Buddha. You could do so as, you're studying these writings as as a piece of literature, and never ascribe or place your faith in the content of those writings. And so when we study the Bible from a literary context, we're criticizing it, we're interrogating it, we're trying to discover its meaning as a piece of literature. And so that's when we dig with these kinds of tools, we're attempting to know and understand the Bible, with those tools in hand. So very good. All right, so what are some of the things that we're looking at? We're looking at vocabulary, we're looking at grammar, we're looking at syntax, we're looking at genre. These are the kinds of things that we are examining and criticizing when we're trying to know what the Bible says and understand what it is saying. Okay, so this is really good stuff. Let's keep going. All right, some of the subcategories of literary context. You've got source criticism, form criticism, narrative criticism. I'm not going to bore you with this stuff. If you were taking this class in a college setting with me, I would be parsing this stuff out for you, but we're not going to worry about this stuff right now. I will just make a comment or two about each of these as we just move through this slide. But source criticism is a subcategory of literary criticism where the researcher is trying to discover the sources that were being utilized when the writer sat down to write. For example, the Gospels, Matthew and Luke. If a source critic were examining the Gospel of, let's just take Matthew for example, they would be able to determine that Matthew had 3 different sources on the table with him as he was writing his gospel. What does that mean? It means when Matthew sat down to write, he had a few other scrolls that he carried with him and that were open on the table when he was writing his own. He was leaning on some other sources that he borrowed from when he wrote his gospel. This is pretty cool when you think about it. So you've got, first of all, he had the book of Mark. Mark was the first gospel that was written. It was written in the 50s. And we know that if you take the book of Mark and you lay it open next to the book of Matthew, 90% of the book of Mark is found in the book of Matthew. So we know that when Matthew wrote his gospel, he had Mark on the desk. He had Mark's gospel. Now, he didn't credit Mark. Today, if you did that, it's called plagiarism and you get in big trouble. Back then, it was a compliment to the author. And so it was a compliment to Mark that when Matthew wrote, he had Mark's gospel in front of him. He had another source in front of him. And to this day, the church doesn't know what this source is. But we know that both Matthew and Luke used this source. Scholars call it Q. You can look this up, you can Google it. Google Q source, and there's tons to read about on this. Q is the German word for Quelle, which is the German word for source. And so the scholars don't know exactly who this person is, but this content is identical between Matthew and Luke, and it comprises about 25% of the book of Matthew. It also comprises about 25% of the book of Luke. The Mark content that's found in the book of Matthew takes up about 50% of the book. So 50% of the book of Matthew is borrowed from the book of Mark. 25% of the book of Matthew is borrowed from this source that they call Q. And then the other 25% is original content that is found only in the book of Matthew. So how cool is that? So source criticism looks at that kind of stuff. Form criticism is what kind of form do these stories that are found in the books of the Bible, what kind of form do they take? And so critics will look at these and say, oh, true meaning of the Bible is found in the forms that were used when they were writing their Bible, when they were writing their stuff. And then narrative criticism is something that assumes the writer had an agenda in mind. And narrative criticism is a really important form of biblical criticism. So it assumes that the writer, when the writer sat down to write, it assumes that the writer had an agenda. Why are they writing this? Why do they have these sources in front of them? And what is their agenda that they're wanting to do? If you sat down to write something, you most likely would have an agenda in mind. Why did you sit down to write this? Who are you writing it to? And what is the agenda? What is the purpose that you had in mind for writing this? So narrative criticism is really important because it takes the big picture of the narrative. Mark is a tough one in terms of discovering what is the overall agenda that they had in mind. Mark, for example, is not one of the 12 disciples, but he was a secretary to Peter. And I use that word like in a big sense, like a secretary of defense or whatever. He had a lot of authority, and he traveled with Peter. He was the interpreter for Peter, and Mark was very smart. And so really, the book of Mark is a collection of Peter's sermons when it really is boiled down to its simplest form. And because Mark, the book of Mark, lacks a lot of connecting narrative in between the stories, it's a really unique book. It's like the curtain opens and you're watching a scene unfold. And it's actually, Mark's way of writing is very exciting. So so the scene takes place and the curtain closes. And there's very little connecting or transitional language from one scene to a next. In fact, Mark uses the word immediately over 40 times, and that's his transition into the next scene where the curtain opens, the scene unfolds, and the curtain closes. And so trying to figure out Mark's agenda is a little rough. He does follow some kind of a chronological flow, but not perfectly. So anyways, narrative criticism is something where we're looking at the big picture here. We're looking at the author, the audience, the plot lines, the development of the characters, the setting. This is what narrative criticism does. And so it's a very unique approach to trying to know and understand the Bible. All right, very good. Meaning is found in the context. And so within literary criticism, meaning is found in the context. So here are some examples. How would you interpret this? Let's say you are speaking in a foreign country and you bring this phrase into what you're saying and you have a translator that's with you. How are they going to translate this? You say the phrase, weird flex, but okay. How are they going to translate that? So you can't do a word-for-word translation here because you know what that phrase means. But the people in this other country are not going to know what this means. So the meaning is found in context. And in this particular case, the context is necessary that we understand the word flex in today's culture. If you had written this phrase and someone in your family is reading this, 500 years from now, they're going to go, what does this mean? Weird flex, but okay. They're going to have to know how that word was being used today. And so that's part of understanding the context. All right, very good. He's a goat. What does that mean? You know what that means. Very good. Greatest of all time. Way to handle that one, Karen. Again, if we fast forward 500 years and someone is trying to translate this or understand what this sentence means, you know that's an insult, right? So, very good. What about this one? Mark. What does that mean? What do you think that means? Is this a noun? Is this like a mark on a paper? Is it a verb? I want you to mark down. Is it a name? What does that mean? We're only going to know when we understand how that word is being used in context, right? Very good. Same with this one. Run. Is that a noun? You ever run? A woman might have a run in her pantyhose. Do women even wear that stuff anymore? I have no idea. Is it a noun? Hey, I'm going to go for a run. Is it a verb? Run, get out of here. All right, so you get it. So some other components of literary context, take into consideration the location, the genre, the figurative language, the literary markers, the location that the book was written or the audience, the genre. We're going to get into that a little bit deeper here in just a second, because that's probably, if in any attempt to know and understand the Bible is going to include some serious consideration of genre. So more on that in just a minute. Figurative language, we've touched on this a little bit as we've recorded these videos. Figurative language is like similes and metaphors, hyperbole, onomatopoeia, right? You know these kinds of things. If you remember these from your high school English classes, I always use these examples. Like someone would say, "I'm so hungry I could eat a horse." You know, that's hyperbole. That's extreme exaggeration. We don't take that literally. So if you heard someone say that, you would not go buy a horse and prepare it as a meal for them. You understand that's figurative language. They're exaggerating. Break a leg, right? If someone says that to somebody when they're going out for an audition, we know this, you don't really want them to break a leg. You're hoping that they get into the cast. So that's what that means. And so we use figurative language all the time. What do we do when we find a verse in the Bible that is using figurative language? Literary markers. This is something that writers use sometimes purposefully, sometimes unintentionally, when they're transitioning into a different topic. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, Mark uses the word immediately over 40 times. That's a literary marker for him. When we see that as the reader, we see the word immediately, we know that Mark is transitioning now into a different topic. The book of Revelation, there's tons of literary markers in there. One of them that comes to my mind immediately is the phrase, in the Spirit. 4 times John says, I was in the Spirit. And we know that when he uses that phrase, it's a major transition into a different topic. And so that's a literary marker. All right, good stuff. Location, we've talked about this. So there it is again, biblical context, pericope, chapter, section, book, testament. Okay, let's move into some genres here. I want to just, in the final few minutes we have together, I want to just take a look at the different genres in the Bible. The first one is law. Law is the genre of law in the Bible is the kinds of writings in the Bible, the kinds of books in the Bible that give instruction and precepts of God given to us through Moses, such as Leviticus and Deuteronomy. All right, so the law books are found in the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Pente is the Greek word for 5. These books were written by Moses, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we find portions of the law that are found in the book of Exodus, which is where the Ten Commandments were given. And then Leviticus is a book that's solely dedicated to the explanation and the description of the law that God had given. So there are 10 commandments, but in addition to that, there are hundreds of other commandments God had given the Israelites. Those are all written in Leviticus, and they're rehashed in the book of Deuteronomy. Cool stuff. Deuteronomy is a second giving of the law. That's what that word means. Deutero is second, and nomos is law. That means it was a second giving of the law. When you read through the book of Deuteronomy, they're getting ready to cross over into the promised land, and Moses calls everybody together, and he says, before you guys cross over, let's just rehash what God has given to us. And it's literally the second giving of the law. So that's a very specific type of genre. And so when we read the law books, we do so with a certain understanding in mind that we're reading law. It's like to say that when you read, I'm going to date myself here, when you read a comic book, you do so differently than how you would read an encyclopedia. When you read a blog or watch a video of an influencer that's traveling the world, you would watch that video differently than you would watch a video of someone explaining how to fix a leak in a faucet. Right? So you get the point here, that when we're holding a certain genre of the Bible, we have to put on a different helmet of understanding of how we read through and hold that genre versus how we would read through and hold different genres. All right, so there are certain literary laws in place that we use when we're trying to understand the law. Okay, let's look at these other genres. Okay, history and narrative. These are the stories and the epics which are more theological in nature than historical. Right? So the historical / narrative genre in the Bible is it's focusing more on the story than it is the historicity. And so if you took the historical / narrative writings in the Bible, if you were to measure them against the historical genre, like reading a history book, these portions of the Bible which are historical and narrative in nature would fail when compared to the expectations that are found within a history book. And what do I mean by that? A history book is concerned about facts, right? Historical facts. The who, what, when, where, how, and why. The dates, the places, the locations, the names of the cities. And a history book goes into a level of precision within its attempt to faithfully record what happened and how it went down, who was there, where it happened, what happened, all that kind of good stuff. So history books go to a level that the Bible does not go to. The Bible is concerned with who was there and what happened and where it took place, but the Bible includes that information because it's trying to tell the story, not because it's trying to preserve the precise historicity. They're more concerned with the story. And the telling of the story is theological in nature, not simply narrative, right? There is a story. The narrative does have a plot. It does have a climax. It does have characters. It does have a conclusion at the end. So all the stuff that is important in narrative criticism is found in the Bible. But again, the history components and the narrative components are there to reveal who God is. The overarching theme within history and narrative is theological in nature. What do we learn about God? And so when you're holding a portion of the Bible that is historical or narrative in nature, yes, it does have the who, what, when, where, why. It does have a plot. It does have characters. But the more important feature is the theology, what we learn about God. Good stuff. All right, so some of the history narrative books in the Bible, you can pause the video here and take a look at that. By the way, I'm sure you guys do this, but let me pause just for a second. When you're watching these videos, if you look over here, I think it's over here. I'm not sure if you're watching on your phone or on your computer, but if you were to drag your mouse down and hover it near the bottom, you'll see that little 1x. You can speed up the videos. I rarely watch videos at 1x anymore. I'm usually around 2x, and Loom, where I record these videos, I think you can go up to 2.5. So if your brain can work that fast, more power to you. But I encourage you to speed up the videos so that you can get through them quicker. Good stuff. All right, so here you can pause the video if you wanted to look more carefully at some of the historical or narrative books of the Bible, and there they are. And again, you read through history books different than you do law books. Different mindset, okay? And by the way, as we continue throughout the rest of this course together, we're going to be grabbing these genres one by one, and I'm going to give you the tools. For example, when you're looking at a law book, what are the tools that you need to have in hand so that you can really know and understand what that book is talking about? And so we're going to go through, and I'm going to give you all the tools so that you know how to understand these various genres. All right, good stuff. Wisdom, there are wisdom writings in the Bible. These are collections of short, pithy maxims such as Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon is another one. These are the wisdom writings. These are meant to be very short, poetic, very pithy, easy. These are little truth statements that are designed to be mnemonic in nature. That is to say that they lend themselves to prose, poetry, so that they're easy to memorize and understand. And so when we're reading through the wisdom books, again, there's a certain way that we read them so that we understand them. Poetry, prose and rhymes, such as Psalms and Song of Solomon and Lamentations. The poetry books are a subcategory of the wisdom books, by the way. I pulled them out separately here, though, because not all the wisdom writings are written in poetic prose. So I pulled these out separately as its own genre, and we'll take a look at that later on. Prophecy. What is prophecy? This is past, present, and future. It is predictive, it is didactic, it is ambassadorial, it includes major and minor prophets. What does all this stuff mean? When you're reading prophecy, and much of the Old Testament is prophecy, when you're reading that, you're reading about stuff that took place in the past, but many of the prophets are writing about stuff that is taking place for them in the present. And they are giving a warning about stuff that's going to happen in the future. Normally, the future components of prophecy are dealing with warnings to Israel like, hey, you've been busted, you've been sinning, you better stop and repent, or here is the damage that's going to come your way. And that's the stuff that was telling them about future stuff that would happen to them. With that, they are predictive in nature, and they are didactic. That is to say that these are writings that were meant to be, when they were consumed by the original reader, something by which and through which they could learn. They were also didactic in terms of how the prophecy and those prophetic utterances were interpreting the law. So prophecy is dependent upon the law. The law came first. And when the prophets were speaking, they were telling Israel, hey, you're busted. There is a covenant violation that has occurred. God has already given you the law and you broke it. And so they were, in so doing, they were rehashing the law. Here's where you went wrong. Let me teach where you went wrong. And so they were predictive and they were didactic. They were ambassadorial. The prophets only wrote and spoke what God told them to write and speak. Let me explain this a little more clearly. Let's pretend I just became the president of America. And oh, how we would be in trouble if this were true. But let's say I'm the president, and during my first year in office, I have a lot of work to do. I have to appoint ambassadors. So let's say we have our ambassador down in let's say somewhere down in South America. That's really pretty. Well, let's just say Mexico, because I can't think of any countries right now that are okay. Fiji, maybe there's a place that has beautiful islands. It's one of the most prettiest places on the planet, and America has a great relationship with Fiji, and so that means that we do business with them, and that means that I need an ambassador that I can send to go live there. And that if ever I need to have a communication between myself and the president of Fiji, I would contact you. And let's say I send you, and you're living in this beautiful place there, and you've got a house and you have a staff, and your only job is to wait to hear from me if I have a communication I need to give to the president. If I contact you and let's say, oh, hey, I have a message for the president, please tell them this, XYZ. Your job as the ambassador is to go to the president and say, oh, I have a communication from President McAfee, and here's what it is. And you would read it exactly. That's what an ambassador does. The prophets were ambassadorial. They only wrote and spoke what God told them to speak. And there are major prophets, which means major meaning the length of their writings, and there are minor prophets. Very good. All right, let's whip through the last of these very quickly. You have apocalyptic genres. This is the kinds of writings in the Bible that speak about the stuff that happens at the end of time. So these are written in poetic and figurative, eschatological, prophetic. These were elucidations of end-time events. That big word eschatological it's very similar to apocalyptic. In Greek, when the writers refer to the eschaton, they're talking about the stuff that happens at the end of time. The apocalypse and apocalyptic writings also mean the end of times. The only difference between the two is that when we use the word apocalypse or apocalyptic, we're talking specifically about the destructive elements of the end of time. Very good. A parable are short stories that Christ used when he was teaching. So that's a particular genre. An epistle is a genre in the New Testament. These are letters from the apostles to their churches. So in the New Testament, you have Gospels, you have the 4 Gospels, and you have the epistles. You also have the book of Acts, which is historical narrative. You also have the book of Revelation, which is apocalyptic. And then you have, so all the epistles are the letters from Paul, James, Hebrews, Jude, all those are epistles. All right, guys, that's the end of our video. God bless you. I hope you're enjoying this course, and in a short time we are going to start getting into these various genres in greater detail. God bless you.